Hi, I am Jack Brewer with Expanding Frontiers Research, and this is the Wayward Sons book group, where this week we will be exploring and reading Chapter 9, UFO Tunnel Vision, in which we examine the seeming bias of NICAP Director Donald Keyhoe. This includes his interactions with various intelligence agencies and records obtained from those agencies, as well as newspaper clippings. The chapter also explores the work of pulp publisher Ray Palmer and his interactions with FBI and CIA. Ultimately, it helps inform our assessments of more current day goings ons in the UFO community. And that brings us to we have another release, a second release of records published at war.gov. And I am open. I would love to hear your thoughts, your enthusiasm, your lack of enthusiasm, what you're hearing around the social media communities. How is this activity at war.gov being received, guys?
Well, so I think a lot of people have been it's quite a bit of disappointment. I think even amongst some of the more like pro kind of believer kind of like crowd, that this is kind of all we've got. Release two was almost entirely videos. If people don't recall, Luna and Burchett and whatnot requested 46 videos a month or a month and a half ago or something that they wanted the government to release. And this release was most of those videos. I believe it was all but two of the ones they requested and three additional videos that were not on the initial request list. Um, Besides these videos, which, as you can expect, were the same kind of like parallax, birds, balloons, or otherwise just ambiguous blurry blobs doing not a whole lot of interesting stuff. That some people insist on analyzing till the cows come home to try and prove are anomalous, but are not that interesting. The only really kind of files that we got, documents, was a collection of Sandia, like green fireball reports from the late 40s. And I went, every single one was released by Blue Book back when we got those in the 70s. And in fact, half of those had been released a few weeks earlier in the FBI releases that we talked about last time. And so they're really there's absolutely nothing new as far as historical documents go in this new release. I did a couple threads where I kind of showed, here's the new document, here's the old document, here's the new document, here's the old document. We had all these documents. Again, a little bit better scans. Like in the past, like when they'd have a map, it would be cut up into like four different segments on different pages. And if you wanted to put it together, you got to like put it together like a puzzle in a photo program. And now we actually got like full single image scans of like the maps and stuff. So that's kind of cool, but nothing new, nothing too exciting. Couple videos out of people going. There's a video out of Syria that people think is instantaneous acceleration. That is really just the camera losing lock and it kind of zooming off the screen. So there's a couple videos people are excited about, but not a whole lot new in this release. It was a big disappointment as far as the first release was better as far as documents go.
I see. And am I hearing you right that some records were reposted that were literally in the first release?
Yeah, so the Sandia stuff, a lot of that was already in the FBI files. So about half the stuff I looked at from the new Sandia release were in the FBI files. They're just different scans because the FBI would maintain their copies and, the DoD or whatever would have their copies. And so the scans in the new release two, are actually slightly better. Some of the tables and maps that the FBI had would be like cut off on the corner of the page or something. But they were the exact same files that were in the FBI release from release one.
I see. How about you, Tanner? Any thoughts on it? Anything you're hearing in your circles?
Well, I don't really have circles, I don't think, but no, I haven't really looked at the files, but I monitor UFO Twitter probably against my better judgment. And I compared it earlier to there was like 2 weeks into the new Trump administration, all of the people in like the Joe Rogan universe were backing him and then kind of quietly distanced themselves from it because they realized that's not the way the popular tide was going. I'm kind of getting that impression with some of the UFO folks. They're seeing that this is either like a nothing burger, or they're saying like, be prepared for fake stuff. My inside source is telling me this isn't the real stuff. So we're already preparing for like ultra disclosure after this disclosure.
That like this is part of the cover up.
Yeah, it's kind of beautiful when you think about it, right?
Yes. And Sharon, Allison, what are I know you're not really plugged into the UFO social media or the people that typically investigate or report on it, at least not to the extent that some of us are that have been attending the group. So what's your finger on the pulse?
This second release, I've heard nothing. I mean, granted, I've been somewhat, staying away from the news, but I still follow social media and stuff like that. I feel like this is just a little blip. And again, for me, I didn't even go to the website this time because I wanted to hear what you guys said, because you would know better. Like, oh yeah, there's something really interesting, or oh no, there's not. And I don't have high expectations at this point for anything they'll release or release in the future. I just don't, especially since they're repeating stuff from a couple weeks ago. And it reminds me of like what they did with the Epstein files. The Epstein files, everyone, the big release. It was stuff that had already been released. So again, all of this I just have no faith in it. So
when talk of this first came about, as we've discussed, during the Biden administration, and it was discussed that UFO records would be collected and re-examined, reprocessed for further release, some of the people I know were hopeful that we would get more information about how some of the deception was done, some of the answers to some of the more intriguing cases that may have involved classified information at the time, things like that would have been human circumstances, just to be clear. And I wasn't particularly optimistic even back then, because I have a lot of doubts how many people that are involved in this process understand those dynamics the way that we do. And like, you have to have an interest in it, and you have to know what you're looking at. And like some of our ears might perk when we hear Project Palladium. A 30-year-old analyst at NARA might not even understand the reference. So I have doubts about how much this may even help change the narrative towards what the CIA and the FBI and different intelligence agencies may have done and been involved in. Another example of that is some researchers, to their credit, got a lot of UFO material declassified. I think was it the 70s, the 80s, probably the 70s, the NSA records, Jeff's nodding. And one of the things the NSA did not release was a document that was a memo from an NSA assignee who we now can piece together was Tom Dooley, who was also a member of the board of directors of the Mutual UFO Network. And they didn't include it in the release because, as they interpreted the FOIA request, probably more correctly than not, to be about unidentified flying objects, not just anything responsive to the term. And as we've discussed before, I eventually got this memo further declassified and published it at a blog I was writing. But my point being that I'd be more interested in those records, and I'm not sure that that's part of it, like what NSA assignees and CIA officers and things like that were exchanging memos. Along those lines, Sharon, you had suggested that some of the motives of some of these people be further considered, like Representative Luna. Is that the kind of thing you're hearing from some of the writers in the political landscape, that be careful about what these politicians are trying to get at with some of this UFO activism?
That's what Dave Troy says.
Yeah.
And, I take his word at most everything. But right now, since Johnson sent them all home because of concerns of how they vote, was it on the War Powers Act? That's also put an interruption in anything. That the distraction back to what the president wants them to do and to vote on. And the distractions of, for example, the Texas primary and these other primaries that the normal political goings on have trumped any talk otherwise. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Like I'll say jokingly, not now, bugmen from Andromeda. There's a lot going on. How about you, Randy? Any related thoughts or things you're hearing or seeing?
No, I didn't bother taking a look at this second release. Just kind of lost interest. I read some of what Jeff talked about, posted, and didn't have much interest in diving any further, really.
Yeah, I'm kind of like that too. I haven't visited the website this time either. I kind of figure between Jeff on Blue Sky and, Dave Troy, Tanner, other people, I kind of gauge it too by if my Yahoo homepage is telling me to check out this Newsmax clipping featuring Avi Loeb and Lou Elizondo, then I don't really have anything that I need to put my attention on, is kind of how I gauge that,
And what is the division of the government that is responsible for or has put out the information?
Is it NARA, Jeff? But the War Department is kind of taking credit for it. Would you put it that like NARA collected it from FBI and Air Force and Air Force Office of Special Investigations? That's my interpretation. Is that in the ballpark, Jeff?
Yeah, as there's a guy who has a Substack that both you and I have retweeted that kind of also went over these files. And if you look at the actual names of the files being released from the war website, they're actually the NARA naming convention that they were required to submit their files to NARA to, back in 2024. And so these files were obviously originally prepared and collected by NARA. And then apparently somebody at the Department of War is deciding what to piecemeal release like from there. But this second release, I will say at least they went to the effort this time of OCRing the file, all one of them, all 116 pages. And they put everything in, again, a single zip. So like you could download all the videos in just a single zip file, and all the PDFs, all 7 of them, in a single zip file. So that made it a little bit easier to collect stuff this time, but it was a much smaller release. I don't know what they still have planned, and I don't know who's actually choosing what to release. As is pointed out, there's people they could consult with that could point them to where there might actually be files to go look for. Like if you go talk to a Jan Aldrich or like a Barry Greenwood, like there's all sorts of stuff that historians have been looking for years, that we even have a good idea what archives they might be at, like Maxwell or wherever, that they could go look. And they need to be consulting with like actual, I guess you would call them subject matter experts on UFO history on these releases. I don't know that they actually are. It doesn't really seem like it.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, thanks for your input, everyone. And this kind of takes us to a blog post I recently did that consisted of records that were provided to me by James Carrion. He is the former international director of the Mutual UFO Network, and indicated to me that they were files that he got from his time with MUFON in the MUFON files. And among them was a scathing letter written in 1968 by former NICAP investigator Don Berliner. And I have that on the screen here, the letter, so that folks can see it. And he was sharing his grievances about NICAP with a fellow UFO investigator, Julian Hennessy, I believe is who it was. And he explained that he was disappointed in a lack of leadership at NICAP and paid employees that were playing and not working is one way he termed it. There can be grievances, personality conflicts, whatnot. But a couple of things that did seem kind of relevant to me, or potentially more relevant than other things, was that he stated that Keyhoe had not conducted a UFO investigation in 10 years, and that was in 1968. And he also indicated that Keyhoe was withholding good cases, as he termed it, from NICAP in order to save them for a book he was writing. And in Berliner's defense, he points out that he protested to the point that Keyhoe let him go and told him he didn't need his services anymore. And he also tells the recipient of the letter that, if you don't agree or you think my complaints aren't justified, just tell me to shut up. Or I'm paraphrasing, but he literally said, tell me to shut up if you want. And so do you find this to be relevant, grieving former employee, a little of both? Any thoughts on that, guys?
I think it lends more to the idea that what was NICAP doing then? Right? If they hadn't done research in 10 years, what were they doing?
Yeah, and I think that was a typical complaint about Keyhoe, was that, as I think I pointed out, he was a PR man. He had been the tour manager for the famous aviator Lindbergh. He was good at stirring stuff up. He lobbied. He got letters opened and read by congressmen. He had a confidence that wasn't really deserved, possibly, but worked for him. And we'll explore some of that in this chapter. But even people that tend to be somewhat of a NICAP apologist or outright support NICAP, tend to say things such as Keyhoe was not a good money manager, he was not a good people manager. But that I think you're on the right track there, Allison. So that does beg the question, why he was appointed to lead a UFO organization. And I think it comes back to because it was in Washington and it wasn't about UFO investigation. Yeah, it was political posturing and things like that. Would be one thought. But I also want to clarify, I don't mean to use this group to just load up and double barrel fire at Keyhoe and NICAP. I think NICAP had some competent, thoughtful, sincere volunteers, and I don't, while it's implied through being critical and objective that there's nothing worth investigating about UFOs, that's not what I'm saying necessarily, and I don't want that to get confused with it. So while this may at times seem like I'm just debunking and being critical, I'd like to point out that questioning the motives of Hillenkoetter and Joseph Bryan and Donald Keyhoe and others really is an altogether different issue than what hypothetically someone's aunt saw in Texas in 1983. I mean, I don't know, so thanks for letting me kind of get that disclaimer out of the way. And any other thoughts on the Berliner letter?
Well, I think, and I've said it kind of before, that Keyhoe is kind of like the Corbell, the Jeremy Corbell of his day, right? Like his primary interest was kind of advocacy and getting the government to share what they know. As UFO cases and history was secondary and really only to be used in cases in which they could push their narrative and their advocacy efforts to get the government to release what they know. It's not about what they have, what they know, what they've researched. It was about getting stuff out of the government. And so Keyhoe didn't need to investigate cases. Like, you'd probably hear cases like, that got sent into NICAP, but like his deal wasn't being an investigator, and it really never was.
That's a good point about what he was doing and what NICAP was doing and what they came to consider themselves doing. Like, if we click through the material in the blog post, if we click through to like a file that James Carrion provided that's of 1979 MUFON journals, one of them contains the Todd Zechel article where he says that NICAP was infiltrated and CIA spies were in it, and it sabotaged MUFON towards the end, and so on and so forth, is his take on it. And one of the interesting things about those journals is we can see that by 1979, NICAPers like Richard Hall were transitioning to MUFON by then. And Hall was the editor. And he makes a statement at the beginning. Hall makes a statement at the beginning of Zechel's article where he says something to the effect of he and Keyhoe and NICAP never solicited classified information or asked anyone for anything that wasn't just public but not known. And as we're going to see in the very records that we're looking at in Chapter 9, that's just not true. I mean, it's just demonstrably not true. Hall might have believed it to some extent. He might have believed it about his own actions, but Keyhoe was an outright nuisance to intelligence agencies. And yeah, he did, I think, come to see that as his contribution to UFO investigation. Was kind of my take on it. Yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
Well, just since Jeff brought up Corbell, I watched his wonderful film Sleeping Dog. That's what I've subjected myself to instead of the UFO files. But it was nice that these new files came in a single zip instead of, Corbell had to drive to a spot where he buried files in the Mojave Desert and dig them out and put a flash drive into his laptop. And then for some reason, all of the icons are on his desktop for these videos called varying stupid names. It is very and I think it is a good comparison because Corbell spends that whole film talking about how the CIA is gonna kill him for what he knows or something, to the point where he's terrified his own mother. I might add, his mom thinks he's gonna be killed by the CIA, and I have no doubt she believes that.
I think it's a good comparison too. I was at a conference one time, and for those that don't know, one of the proceedings of these events is often towards the end, a group of speakers, the people that spoke, will all come out together and be seated on stage and take various questions from the audience. And this was quite the sight of speakers. It involved, among others, a woman named Dolores Cannon, who was an infamous promoter of pseudo hypnosis and retrieving past lives and interactions with aliens and things from hypnosis. And it also involved a career CIA consultant, Colonel John Alexander. And among the handful of speakers on stage at the end are both of these people. And Dolores was asked about some things she had claimed during her presentation about people she knew that had knowledge and proof of aliens and a cover-up and things. And so an audience member asked her why they don't come forward and present their evidence. And she kind of tensed up and kind of barked, "They've been told they'll be killed." And Colonel Alexander could not contain himself. Like, his reflexive response to that was like a burst of laughter. And I'm not sure I even find it funny. It's kind of amusing, but it's just like such a microcosm of the macrocosm, we could talk about plenty of misdirection the colonel's been involved in himself, yet he just could not even contain himself with Dolores Cannon explaining the reason people don't come up here and tell you about the aliens is because they'll be killed. So, yeah, it is an old go-to. It's proven effective. When everything else fails, you just go to, I can't. They'll kill me if I tell you, like the joke. And if there is a joke in there, it's been my experience that love or money couldn't get these people to shut up if they had anything other than unsubstantiated rumors. But that's just kind of my take on it.
Alexander laughed at that because we don't use lethal weapons. We use non-lethal weapons. There's no killing involved.
Yes, he was a specialist in non-lethal weapons. That's right. That is correct. Well, shall we start on chapter 9? Would anyone volunteer to read the first section? It's about 2 to 3 pages, please.
I just wanted to say one thing right quick.
Sure.
Where we left off last week talking about the letters between Menzel and Hillenkoetter. I did find you can get Menzel's book from Project Gutenberg. So I got an ebook from that and started reading that. And pretty interesting so far, pretty well written. So kind of looking forward to reading the rest of that. That's available if anybody else is interested.
Yes, I am. And Menzel was a very interesting character. Yes, I am interested in hearing more about what you think of his books and work. Yes. Thanks for letting us know.
I'll be happy to read first.
Thank you, Sharon.
Chapter 9, UFO Tunnel Vision. NICAP enjoyed wide coverage from the press. A 1957 archive newspaper article describing the organization and a UFO report it championed provides a typical example. The clipping explained that the first edition of the NICAP new monthly publication, the UFO Investigator, was going to include a description of a case in which a California radar operator tracked 4 UFOs. The objects were reportedly cruising in excess of 3,600 miles per hour. The incident would go on to receive frequent mention from the NICAP representatives. The article further explained Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter would help govern NICAP. This is quoted, the CIA, which he headed, is Uncle Sam's top intelligence agency, the writer pointed out. Admiral Farney was listed as a founder of the organization. Major Fournette's inclusion and expertise as a former UFO investigator for the Air Force was cited, and the involvement of community leaders was noted. Major Keyhoe's career as an author of 3 UFO books was referenced. He was also reported as believing the Air Force had a plot to keep UFO facts from the public. Keyhoe was quoted as saying the real mission of NICAP was to get the Air Force to open its secret files on saucers. The popularity of the perspective illustrates how UFO tunnel vision creates blind spots for various circumstances, such as national security issues. Frankly, it borders on inexplicable how military officers, many with substantial experience in the intelligence community, could not see it problematic to demand secret files be opened. Potential hidden agendas of the intelligence officers partaking in such a scheme momentarily aside, it is rather dumbfounding how this could not have been understood to inevitably create suspicions about the loyalty and intentions of involved parties, if not their very competence. At least some of them numbered among those who apparently found the prospect of alien life visiting us so overwhelmingly intellectually seductive, they didn't care what apple carts they upset. This is a primary area that demonstrates a difference in the thinking habits among people who find the NICAP story to be about UFOs, as compared to those who find it interesting for social reasons, such as the seeming ongoing CIA presence. Similar could actually be said about the UFO topic in general. It makes perfect sense to people with a burning and arguably understandable desire to learn about UFOs if they demand the military and intelligence agencies open all potentially related classified files. It makes equally as much sense to those with an eye to the intelligence community that such files remain classified for reasons that, in probably a vast majority of instances, have little to nothing to do with UFOs. Such reasons might include properly classified information pertaining to sources and methods. In such cases, the publishing of records might detrimentally reveal how data was obtained and analyzed. If your U-2 plane is classified and its pilot is supposed to be retired and running a dairy farm in Wisconsin, you're not very well going to give Donald Keyhoe a file explaining how the plane helped record flight capabilities of an aircraft he happens to mistakenly believe to originate from another planet. You're also not going to throw caution to the wind and release files which may exist pertaining to flying objects you haven't confidently identified, even if the data collecting process does not jeopardize operation security. You necessarily interpret recorded air traffic as human manufactured aircraft. You likewise investigate occurrences of radar anomalies as weather phenomena. Deceptive electronic warfare, see electronic countermeasures, technical malfunctions or similar circumstances. To you, it's not about a UFO, it's an information gathering process and a bit of a poker game in which you don't tip your hand. You simply do not want your adversaries to know how much you do or do not know about what they're doing. Neither do you want them to know your latest tools and abilities to document what they're doing. Intelligence agencies are not in the business of clarifying operations, and they most certainly do not exist for the purpose of making their understandings of any given topic clear to the global public. We may argue the practicality of the policies all we want, but the facts will remain. In contrast, those afflicted with UFO tunnel vision tend to only see reports and classified I lost one place. And classified files as indicative of some type of anomalous phenomena. If not non-human intelligence or ET, they often confidently believe classified records contain profound revelations about UFOs themselves. Arguments to the contrary, or even suggestions it might not be in the best national interest to reveal which files are about relatively legitimate unknowns and which are not, are typically dismissed out of hand. No matter how many files are released, the supposed best files are always believed to remain slightly out of reach. UFO groups and their supporters tend to make judgments about what constitutes a mysterious UFO as compared to an aircraft not yet identified or similar prosaic occurrence. The military has understandably always been interested in monitoring air traffic and related intelligence matters, and often does not detail its reasons and findings. Once saucer enthusiasts form mental constructs and assumptions around events of their choosing, It is often nearly impossible for them to contemplate an alternative and less sensational context. In quotes, I consider that the evidence that the UFOs are real and are interplanetary machines is conclusive. Keyhoe was quoted in the above referenced 1957 newspaper article. He therefore apparently believed classified files would confirm his conclusion, and he may very well have been unaware his supposition was not an objective observation. He certainly would not have been the first or last.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate that. As Randy was observing last week, his mind was made up going into it. And I mean, they're even stating that the purpose of the organization is to pierce the wall of secrecy that the Air Force and the CIA have surrounding UFOs, which they believe to be, according to Keyhoe, interplanetary spacecraft. And when they're not saying that, they're putting it in publications and making statements that they're an objective fact-finding organization that will go where the evidence leads. So I just don't think that can be overlooked in the historic record of what these guys were doing, what they thought they were doing, how the organization was founded in the first place. By the way, Jeff, a few minutes before we started the meeting on Blue Sky, so that would be Wednesday evening about 7:30 or so Eastern time, he reposted his thread on that UFO case that is alluded to right there in the first few lines of this chapter, right, Jeff?
Yes. Yeah, and the interesting thing is this is actually a case where there's perhaps a UFO file they could go find and release to us, right? So Keyhoe actually wanted to get a copy of a report. Back in those days, investigations for Blue Book were done by the 4602nd Intelligence Division or whatever, and they had a report on this that he wanted to get a copy of that I guess he was unable to. And I tried to see if that report has since came out. Interestingly, one of the things that nobody's talked about is a few years ago, we actually got a copy of the 402nd investigation files, at least for 3 years. Unfortunately, the copies we got ended December 31st, 1956, which was 3 months before this event happened in March. So we still don't have that report. But we got actually hundreds of files of hundreds of cases over a several year period that they investigated for Blue Book, released from the NARA website 3 years ago, and nobody's talked about those. That's actually a far bigger release than we've gotten, with the war files in the last month. But
interesting. I was looking at that thread too, and just like we were talking about moments ago, of it needs to involve subject matter experts and people that know the nuances. I was looking through your thread and saw an email where Fran Ridge, I believe it was saying this case had a lot of problematic aspects to it. And so, I don't know, where it falls on a scale of 1 to 10, but it just goes to show that seasoned investigators and researchers knew some alternative theories for it by this stage of the game too, Any other thoughts, anyone? Who'd like to go ahead?
I was just gonna say, I thought you did a good job in that first section of kind kind of providing the other side of the, like, kind of like the military side for why it's in their best interest to not release these documents that people want to be released. So I thought you did a good job there. And I'm not familiar with the U-2 plane and the pilot on the dairy farm. Was that an actual event? I'm not familiar with that.
It was a reference to something they call sheep dipping, that which again really may inform us about things we're currently seeing. They will give, I think we explored it in a previous chapter. It's all kind of running together for me though. Like, that's the challenge of editing your own writing. You don't know if you already wrote it in a previous chapter or not. But the CIA will give its personnel cover stories, and sometimes it'll even involve the person will write letters to relatives and do all kinds of things to promote the story that, well, I'm hanging up my military boots and I'm opening that little dairy farm, down in Indiana, and, I'm going to just sit back and enjoy my pension, when they're actually being moved into a much more secure and secret thing. And that was the case with U-2 pilots. That project, just as far as a paper trail goes, did not exist. Like on classification, it just did not exist. And so the pilots involved in it had to have cover stories of what they did and why they weren't at other bases, and it would involve their civilian lives. I think one of the letters I quoted, one of the guys even joked about. So I'm definitely not still with the CIA.
I remember that now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Any volunteers to read next, please?
I will.
Thank you.
Keyhoe composed a report to NICAP Board of Governors and panel of special advisors in 1959, in which he included a poll. The second question asked if they agreed the Air Force withholding information on UFOs is dangerous, and if it could lead to a false claim by the USSR that saucers are secret Soviet weapons. The arguably oversimplistic question represented one of Keyhoe's ongoing talking points, in which he employed a strategy of suggesting UFO secrecy was detrimental to public safety. Among his reasons was the argument UFOs could be mistaken for Soviet aggression with potentially catastrophic results. Keyhoe's poll to the NICAP leadership also included the following item. Do you want me to read that?
I'll summarize it. I put it on the screen, and he's basically saying that he has cases that he's gotten from Air Force personnel, and we know many of the cases they have listed, but a few of NICAP's best cases were given to us confidentially. We could release the basic facts, but not reveal the source. The Air Force wants these cases so they can ridicule them, and if possible, muzzle the witnesses. This was Keyhoe's contention, and he was asking the readers of the NICAP material, do they agree that NICAP is honor bound to continue refusing the Air Force further information about these reports?
Keyhoe's ability to pry UFO reports from within the military became a staple of his reputation. The circumstances might be considered rather astonishing of a retired officer obtaining confidential information with potential security implications while refusing to disclose it to applicable authorities. While some might consider this to be heroic efforts at UFO disclosure, suffice to say that was not the position of the U.S. Air Force. It would only stand to reason solutions and counter strategies would be considered by the powers that be. Records obtained from the CIA indicate in 1958, Keyhoe wrote the agency inquiring about what would be known as the Robinson Panel, the scientific UFO think tank explored earlier. The letter provided in its entirety on the following two images contains several points of interest. We can observe Keyhoe implementing his strategy of suggesting UFO secrecy was a threat to public safety. We also see him informing the agency of his knowledge since 1953 of the meeting of the then-secret CIA Scientific Advisory Panel. The same CIA PDF contains an interagency message, pictured below, discussing a response to Keyhoe's letters. Variations of the stance were recurring themes at multiple agencies. It would not have been particularly difficult for the CIA to investigate and surmise some circumstances surrounding Keyhoe's sources of information about the Robinson Panel, considering the involvement in NICAP of men like Major Fournet, who testified to the group. Perhaps, however, there is a larger point to be made here about the UFO tunnel vision. Major Keyhoe and UFO enthusiasts apparently found no issues with securing informants in places of interest. Neither did they seem to think it problematic to solicit military personnel to leak documents. They apparently found it honorable and encouraged it, at least to a certain extent. Keyhoe and company then seemed to feel it completely reasonable to handle such information as if it belonged to them, minding its security, protecting it from the very agencies from which it was obtained. They then suggested that they felt harassed when such agencies came calling, or persecuted at the prospect of having their organization infiltrated in a similar manner as they were themselves infiltrating agencies. Whatever one's opinion on such issues, it should not be difficult to understand why I question the wisdom or authenticity of people, particularly intelligence officers, who failed to grasp the problematic nature of their ideology. NICAP alienation was arguably much more the expected natural evolution of events than an exception. A bit of tolerance and empathy may be extended to NICAP and mid-20th century UFO activists. Granted, there wasn't much of a template with which to work. The more experience the UFO scene got under its collective belt, the more difficult it becomes to understand outrage about how swatting beehives leads to bee stings. The image below is from a now declassified CIA file and represents a handwritten note apparently arising out of Keyhoe's then latest inquiry to the National Security Council about saucer policy. The 4-page file contains a 1958 exchange between Keyhoe and the Council, which includes the National Security Council advising copies were being forwarded to the Department of Defense. The NSC Executive Secretary, when subsequently writing the DoD, enclosed copies of to the CIA as well, due to Keyhoe's assertion he had proof the agency was concerned with UFOs. We might surmise the NSC alerted the DoD and CIA to Keyhoe's persistent questions about UFO policies for any number of reasons that did not necessarily have much to do with covering up literal anomalous sky phenomenon. At the least, his implication about possessing information contradicting CIA public policy, regardless of the specific topic, was quite possibly used as the reason enough in itself to keep the agency advised. He was, of course, suggesting he had a secret, and at other times he outright said so. We might also confidently surmise the NSC, CIA, and DoD personnel in the loop had to break their attention from something else in order to repeatedly deal with Keyhoe. It only stands to reason they would rather have not been writing extra letters and expending additional energy to address variations of the same questions about UFOs over and over again. The sheer audacity of some of Keyhoe's inquiries was shocking, perhaps even humorously so in hindsight. The following letter from a CIA file is indicative of another round of exchanges between the Major and the agency. The circumstances arose when in 1957, the CIA Office of Scientific Intelligence requested the Contact Division obtain photos from Ralph C. Maher, a photographer for KYW TV in Cleveland. In November 1957, Mr. Maher provided for analysis 5 photos he shot in 1952. John Hazen, a CD officer, returned the photos to Maher in December 1957. According to the CIA version of the story, Maher asked Hazen for the agency's evaluation of the photos, explaining he intended to make a television show about UFOs and wanted to suggest an intelligence agency found his photos of interest. Hazen reportedly advised Maher he would prefer the photographer not take that approach, but added that Maher was of course free to choose for himself. Keyhoe later contacted Maher, and stories of witness suppression and CIA interest in UFOs resulted. Keyhoe tried to confirm Hazen's employment with the agency in writing in an effort to expose a CIA interest in UFOs, but no such letter would be forthcoming. Questions persisted about the agency's role regarding UFOs, and the CIA eventually acknowledged its concern over secrecy made matters worse. From the perspective of Keyhoe and his supporters, NICAP was advocating government accountability and transparency, or at least that was their public stance. It seemed likely there were layers of agendas, and the most prevalent among Keyhoe and his allies appears to have been to separate the United States government from proof of an extraterrestrial presence that some in NICAP were thoroughly convinced the Air Force and the CIA were hiding. It warrants pointing out the CIA and companies shared some responsibility in public mistrust, as explored in previous examples of deception and misdirection. It's not as if it was completely unjustified to suspect that there were stories to be read between the lines. It is also understandable Keyhoe was motivated to document an apparent CIA interest in UFO photos after the agency claimed it was not involved in UFO investigations. It nonetheless seemed to remain outside the scope of UFO activist considerations that a claimed interest in photos did not necessarily translate into having an interest in them for the same reasons as UFO buffs. Neither did it necessarily mean OSI was concerned the pictures portrayed what some of the public happened to believe was captured on the film. There are lots of possibilities and potential scenarios. For instance, while working on another research project, I happened upon documentation the FBI considered, quote, using the pretext of an automobile accident, end quote, to conduct an interview with a person of interest. A file obtained from the FBI contained a 1969 message from the Washington field office, informing Director Hoover that unless advised to the contrary, it would approach the person under the guise of investigating a car accident supposedly occurring in the vicinity and involving a government vehicle. The ruse enabled the interview without revealing the purpose of the investigation, which was actually pertaining to the people the individual was with during the time in question.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate reading. Isn't that wild that Keyhoe is like writing the CIA, like not even in the form of a FOIA request, but just writing the CIA and saying, this committee would like to know if you have an agent such and wanting his specific whereabouts and when. I guess there was a different culture then, but it just seems really hard. Even at the time I wrote that, which was a few years ago, it seems really hard to, like, this is what I mean about a confidence that may have not been completely warranted and deserved. I don't know what you think this committee warrants in respect and power, but let's just say I'm not going to be writing the CIA and telling them what the Wayward Sons book group would appreciate being informed about. That, like I say, isn't even in the form of a FOIA request. Just, you know, and put it in writing while you're at it, you know, send it on over to me. And of course, go ahead, Jeff. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just gonna say again, I'm shocked at how similar this all is to the modern disclosure movement, and again, people like Corbell, who are getting these government leaks from who knows where, and hiding behind how it's honorable and about accountability and transparency, but yet they will not actually share that information with anyone else. Like they're arguing for the government to be transparent while simultaneously hoarding the information that they're getting leaked to them. And we've seen this again. Tanner mentioned watching his new documentary, and they showed some of the videos that have now been released by the government. Well, Jeremy Corbell's version of the videos are actually unredacted. He's got better versions of the videos than what we just got out of the government. But so why don't they share them? If they're about transparency and accountability, these advocates like Keyhoe or Corbell should have been sharing that information back out again instead of being hypocrites and not being transparent themselves.
Here, here. Just to clarify, any things I may say or suggest are not necessarily, stances and positions of Expanding Frontiers research. They're my personal opinions. EFR is obviously not a monolith, and I'm about as socially liberal as they come. I'll just go ahead and say that, just to kind of clarify where I'm headed with this statement, that I could write entire books, and I've done many blog posts on the unethical, probably illegal, and covert activity of agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations wasn't made up of choir boys either. And nonetheless, I have to say, if we can take those UFO blinders off for a minute, it's absolutely outrageous that a committee that's trying to infiltrate intelligence agencies sounds an alarm about being infiltrated by intelligence agencies. Am I wrong? I mean,
historically, even in, a lot of like counterculture movements in the 60s, like COINTELPRO, Chaos days, it's kind of funny how the parallels are there too, because some of those groups were by and large created by federal agencies or the CIA. And then you'd have members specifically trying to stir that paranoia about being infiltrated by the CIA, because that would effectively kneecap even the effective members of the group. And I don't know, that kind of thing happens in ufology again and again.
Welcome, Steve. Welcome.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Sorry for coming in late. How's everyone doing?
Good, good. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Good points there, Tanner. In fact, it became like post 70s and Zechel's ranting. It became like a common thing in the UFO genre that if you got too outrageous with your stories, you started getting accused of being a CIA plant or a CIA officer. Or if you asked questions and wanted things clarified, you'd get accused of being a government asset, that if you expected accountability or sources to actually be able to produce what you claim they did. So yeah, it did set a pattern that then went on for years of, oh, you critical of Bud Hopkins and his hypnosis experts? What are you, some kind of FBI informant or something? Yeah, became kind of a common thing.
Well, and I think pretty soon after that 70s period, you have it's technically the counterculture, but I'm thinking more like like Danny Sheehan specifically started intersecting with ufology, which kind of took this stance, and he was at the same time kind of commingling with the lawsuits against Iran-Contra type investigations. What's her name? Karen Silkwood. He basically destroyed that case by inserting himself into it. And I think I don't know. Like, I think it becomes hard to tell the difference between a con man and a intelligence officer, and that's why ufology has been sort of a uniquely good playing ground, because you can be either and be quite successful at whatever you're trying to do.
True enough. True enough.
There was a reference to a poll that Keyhoe was writing a little bit ago. Did that ever get sent out, or the results compiled or anything? Do we know?
I don't know about results. I'm pretty sure it was sent out. One thing I can tell you is he got feedback that told him the membership was really tired of rattling swords with the Air Force, that they were over that they wanted to read about UFO cases. They didn't want to read about playing gotcha with the FBI. But I don't know. I may have overlooked it. I don't know if there is a actual report of surveys taken by NICAP. There may be, if you want to dig through those files.
I was looking at the rest of the questions that were suggested for that poll, and one of them was, do you think that personal contact has been made, like UFOs have made personal contact with people? And I was curious about that, because it seemed like at the beginning that the people who thought that in NICAP kind of got shoved out.
Yes, that was definitely a point of contention, that they weren't sure how to deal with the contactee phenomenon because it had so much momentum. They didn't want to alienate all of those people. And as Tanner was just kind of getting at, they apparently could be persuaded rather easily to get on a bandwagon. So it was a bone of contention. Do we want the contactee followings? And I've published and found newspaper clippings of where Keyhoe would go and do appearances with the people that claim to be UFO contactees. And he would also claim that he wasn't supportive of their claims. There was a lot of like what we see currently, or what we've seen in the last few years, from like To the Stars and some of the guys that are on Newsmax and Fox News this week will tell you nobody's saying it's aliens when they're on TV, and when they're on their home turf with more tolerant crowds, they are all about the aliens, all about
it. They wanted that contactee money, but they didn't want the association with the contactee topic. Some of NICAP's bigger early donors were contactee people. And they were happy to take that $1,000 or whatever, from whatever old lady. But in fact, one of them, I think, they eventually kind of booted out. But they took plenty of money from her for some years before they kind of pushed her out. But
yeah, they did. The lady that married the treasurer that died. Yeah. Rose Hackett. Yeah. And she was, and that was about 10 grand in today's economy. It was a significant amount of money. Another one was, and it helps me get the reading through all this again, helps me get it in context of things I had forgotten and stuff too. Clara John was a ghostwriter for George Adamski, arguably the most popular contactee. And Yeah, they were fine with it when they wanted her to bring her group, which was NICAP originally, was Clara John's Saucer Group, was where Townsend Brown was speaking and getting support, and he and Morris Jessup, were going to Clara John's group, and she was all about contactees. I picture her as like a more current day kind of Edgar Casey group kind of person. And I don't mean that derogatorily. I just kind of picture that she might have had, the brandy and the candlelight, and she was just into interesting, cool stuff to chat about, probably.
You ever seen a picture of what she looks like?
Younger, when she was like 19, there was a photo in the newspaper of her getting married. I don't know as she aged. I actually came across that blog post. I found it in one of Jeff's threads. A guy that does a blog called Saucers That Time Forgot has a lot of good sourced material on Clara John. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Kurt Collins' blog. Kurt does a lot of really, really great work digging into like some of the old cases, but also just the people involved in the topic, some of the more like social cultural aspects of the topic, forgotten UFO investigators like Clara John that a lot of people don't know about anymore, and sharing that with the public.
Yeah, it's important to have those original sources. Like, there's the stories that everybody knows, supposedly. And then when you actually like get the documents from the FBI or the sheriff's office, and you find the newspaper clippings that originally reported whatever it is everybody knows, then you find that the popular narrative isn't even correct. And so it's really good to have those sources too when you're writing. If you're like, I can't say Clara John did such and such and so if I don't source it. And so, yeah, thanks to people like Kurt Collins that will give you those sources on various topics. His is a good blog to search for. If you're doing something, you can go check, doing something by, covering an older topic. Tanner Boyle, who's here with us, he does a lot of good stuff too, that if he asserts something, he'll have a source with it. Jeff has been doing UFO threads for years now, that he'll give you the sources that make the claims. So yeah, that stuff is important.
I even grab old rare books off the shelf and scan the pages myself and upload them if I need to, because I'm all about gotta include the sources. That's something I've always hated about so much UFO work out there, is like even UFO books don't even so much as list sources in them. They're just narratives of stuff. You gotta have sources, guys, and because I've got a lot of material, I like to include the pages, the sources as well, so people can just like look and read it for themselves, because not everybody can, has access to such old material like sitting around that they can just go look up.
That was actually one of the things that first concerned me before I started getting the records from the National Archives about Mary Von King and Council Services, and before I got the records from the CIA about Helen Coder getting the Economic Cooperation Administration that then, subcontracted Council Services. Before I got into all of that, I was interested in Zechel's narrative because it's the kind of stuff I'm interested in. But it concerned me that he'd just throw that around like a story and not have any citations, you know? And they were kind of like the original people that became the future of ufology, that act offended if you ask them to verify how they knew something, you know? And like Zechel was blaming the NICAP board, like Joseph Bryan and the original founders like Nicholas de Roquefort. But on the other side of the same coin was Joseph Bryan making outrageous claims about UFOs with no sources. So they were like the original people that everybody's got this great narrative, and it is one of those everybody knows stories. Everybody knows UFOs are from Mars or from Venus or another solar system. But when you get those FBI records, you get the newspaper clippings, you look at Bryan contradicting himself from one statement to another. You look at Zechel claiming he was, or letting the Washington Post publish that he was a former NSA man, but then having an apologetic explanation for it to Tom Dooley. It's definitely one of those circumstances where the popular narrative just isn't supported at all by the actual forensic evidence of the documents and the clippings and things.
Shocking, Jack. That doesn't sound right for this topic.
Almost made me lose my sip of iced coffee there. Who would
like John Alexander when Dolores Cannon was talking?
Yeah, he would have. If he had had a beverage, he would have spit it all over the stage. That was how it went. Who would like to read next at The Evolving Opinion? Please.
I can read for penance for coming in late if anyone wants.
Thank you.
Okay. The Evolving Opinion, Keyhoe was a nut on the UFO topic. In addition to getting tired of conducting tedious correspondence with him, may have had something to do with content he chose to publish. In his 1953 book, Flying Saucers from Outer Space, Keyhoe passed along an image now known as Silverman. Keyhoe cited a publication which depicted the photo as the capture of a Mars man and included in his description a sensational storyline that accompanied the picture. Keyhoe noted the tale was not new and had been previously run in a similar version by a different outlet. Keyhoe did not report and may have been unaware of the initial source of the story. According to internet personality and researcher Isaac Coy, the original rendition of the photo appeared on an April 1st, 1950 German newspaper edition with the title Der Mars Mensch. A few days later, the paper apparently admitted it was an April Fool's joke, but that did not stop the spread of the picture along with various embellished narratives. Silverman, pictured below, continues to periodically surface today, rarely with explanations of its origin as reported by Coy. The false stories are much more commonly repeated from one book and social media post to another. A 1957 newspaper article proclaiming saucer investigators offered a deal to the Air Force reported that NICAP presented an 8-point plan of cooperation. The plan was reportedly designed to end controversy and public confusion over UFOs. Intelligence officers taking up the NICAP cause were apparently either obtuse, for what may have been any number of reasons, or unaware the Air Force was not looking for Marine majors to offer unsolicited advice on how to run its affairs. It is possible Keyhoe thought some of his moves were good publicity strategies. In a manner of speaking, they were, at least from the perspective that we're still talking about NICAP so many decades later. He may have enjoyed a certain degree of success pressuring the Air Force and intelligence agencies into some UFO-related projects. The practicality and sincerity of the effort expended in such projects is very much in question, however. It is nonetheless clear future FOIA researchers benefited from some paths forged by the likes of Keyhoe and mid-20th century investigators. Everything is relative. It might also be considered that somewhat in Keyhoe's defense, a number of UFO researchers still play such games today. It is common for UFO activists to purport to be pressuring the government agencies. Whether or not current-day UFO researchers sincerely consider their activities to be serious disclosure ploys or simply a target to gain advantageous public attention is another matter. Records pertaining to Major Keyhoe obtained from the FBI include a 1958 letter he authored to J. Edgar Hoover. The two-page letter indicates it was not Keyhoe's first submission inquiring about UFO policies to the FBI director. Along with his usual insinuations, the message included Keyhoe's request for an interview with a spokesperson, quote, acquainted with the facts and the FBI policy which may be involved, unquote, as he similarly asked of the CIA. The following image from the letter shows questions Keyhoe additionally posed to Director Hoover. Do you want me to read those questions?
No, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. The FBI may have been among the more effective of all intelligence agencies at dealing with Keyhoe, as evidenced in Hoover's response to Keyhoe's latest inquiry. I requested the FBI conduct a search for additional records, but it indicated no files were located that dated back to 1935, as referenced in the above FBI memo. The reference may have pertained, at least in part, to the mention of Keyhoe's irresponsible writing. This was not a perspective limited to the FBI, as it was considered potentially relevant to some of his critics as well. Keyhoe was a well-established writer by the time he authored UFO books, having been published in such popular outlets as the Saturday Evening Post and Reader's Digest. He also had written for some of the most widely distributed pulp magazines on topics considered science fiction or weird fantasy. That aspect of his writing career contributed to doubts surrounding his motives and objectivity about the UFO topic. Keyhoe's short story, Through the Vortex, made the July 1926 cover of Weird Tales. Raymond Palmer was arguably the king of 20th century pulp fantasy genre, publishing such magazines as Amazing Stories and Fate. Palmer covered the Kenneth Arnold flying saucer story extensively, as well as some quite dubious UFO cases. The lines between fact and fiction were extremely blurry. It is widely accepted that pulp magazines played a major, substantial roles in cultivating public belief in saucers and fringe topics, and their popularity is undeniable. Files released by the FBI indicate an investigation of Palmer was opened in 1953 after concerns were expressed to the Bureau that he was a communist sympathizer. The perception was based upon articles advocating peace that were published by Palmer. Such points of view were often considered anti-military and unpatriotic. Similar was the case among messages promoted by so-called contactees who claimed their ET diplomats wanted everybody to just get along. The FBI did not find Palmer to be a communist threat, but problems arose in 1954 when he published a story in his Mystic magazine titled Venusians Walk Our Streets. The piece was authored by Paul Vest, who claimed acquaintance with said Venusians. Of concern to Hoover was Vest's allegation that FBI labs were in possession of a plate of heavy steel, which, according to the letter received by the Bureau, Vest's story claimed a man from space marked with a half-inch deep streak by simply and without effort passing his fingernail over it. Hoover subsequently confirmed to his satisfaction the Bureau was not in possession of any such steel plate, nor did it have knowledge of visitors from Venus. The director then advised agents to make Palmer of Evanston, Illinois, aware that that was the case. Hoover further requested agents inform Palmer, quote, "We do not appreciate having the name of the Bureau used in fantastic stories appearing in his publication to add credence to his stories and articles," unquote. A resulting FBI memo in response to Hoover indicates Palmer was contacted. He claimed it was an oversight on his part to allow the dubious reference to the Bureau to remain in Vest's story and apologized for it. He also offered to print a retraction refuting Vest's claim about the FBI. According to the FBI report, Palmer stated, quote, he would be glad to insert an article agreeable to the Bureau in the next issue of Mystic magazine. He was informed the FBI had no recommendation that in that respect, and that whatever or not he desired to refute, part of Vest's article was solely up to him. During the course of the interview, Palmer told the FBI he regularly forwarded UFO-related letters to the CIA. The July 22nd, 1954 memo explains, Mr. Palmer advised that he receives approximately 50 letters per week concerning flying saucers, and pointed out that he takes those letters which appear to be most feasible and furnishes the information to the CIA in Chicago, noting that he has been advised that they are interested in flying saucer reports. A 1953 report contained in the FBI Palmer file lists 5 publications operated by Palmer at the time, including Fate. The report added that Fate magazine had a circulation of 65,000. One might wonder if Palmer made similar offers to the CIA as he extended to the FBI about publishing agreeable stories. The FBI responded to my 2020 FOIA request on Palmer with the above referenced file. It informed me another file might be obtained from the National Archives and Records Administration. NARA responded to my subsequent request that it indeed located and would process the file, which consists of 33 pages, after NARA returns to regular operating procedures following the pandemic. The file has not yet been received as of this writing.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And yeah, this is pretty wild, isn't it? I thought in kind of coded language that Mr. Palmer was he knew that the FBI was unhappy with him, and according to the FBI, during that interaction when he was being told to not make the FBI part of his sensational stories, he says, by the way, I got some folks over at CIA and they like me to forward them stuff, implying, like, to me that says he's willing to deal. Like, that's what I'm kind of hearing from this. And then says that he would be glad to insert an article agreeable to the Bureau. Yeah, that just sounds to me like he's asking the FBI, what would you like me to do, and what's in it for me, and a safe way to propose it, seemed to me.
I remember from reading Richard Serrano's history on the Shaver mystery. It's called the book called War Over Lemuria, that Palmer essentially talked about the Air Force and I think the FBI being like just kind of fixtures of the Amazing Stories offices, which I always found an interesting detail, given that shortly after the Shaver mystery, you have, I mean, Palmer's pretty integral to the UFO meme coming to popular consciousness with Kenneth Arnold. And I also just wanted to share, I found this in a charity shop in England. I gotta unblur. Everybody see that?
Fate magazine, that's Ray Palmer, right?
Yeah. It's one from 55. So I don't think he was editor by this point, but he was definitely still in control of the magazine. I was just shocked. I found that for £2 in a charity shop. I don't think they knew what they had.
Good for you. Good find. And yeah, Palmer was very influential in popularizing the overall narrative. Thus, why I included him and referenced that the FBI's research, they made Hoover aware. The special agent that was writing the report made Hoover aware. He's distributing this crap to like 60,000 people in this one magazine, and he's got multiple magazines. Yeah, yeah. And yes, he was very influential in the original storyline of Kenneth Arnold and Maury Island and how it all came up. And then he kept it going and appeared to have multiple sources that were doing it. Like he'd get different writers and stuff while he was the editor. Yeah, while it's still really just the same guy.
And I think the proximity to the Shaver mystery is something that ufologists don't really want to deal with that much. That it was, not only was it kind of the spiritual sequel to the Shaver mystery, which was basically a schizophrenic man who thought two races of beings lived underground and shot rays into his head. And Palmer would take his stories and kind of gussy them up for publication. They still weren't very good, but I guess they made for compelling reading because it was very good for Amazing Stories readership. But it's in such quick succession that when the flying saucer stuff starts, they go to Richard Shaver to, what's your thoughts on the flying saucer mystery? And would you be surprised to know that they came from underground?
There's so much overlap too in all of this stuff. At EFR, we had kind of stumbled into, from doing FOIA requests and FBI espionage investigation involving a foreigner that they really weren't even sure where he was from and, you know, how many aliases he was using and whatnot. And this man had developed contacts in the UFO community is how we stumbled into it. And he was deeply involved with trying to get articles written, published about UFOs. And he was a contact of some people at the New York Saucer Information Bureau. And the editor there was known for articles she had written about going to Morocco and exploring the caves. And she had sensational stories about beings that were in these caves underground, and that everybody knows in Morocco that that's the case. And I almost feel like that great final scene to Burn After Reading sometimes, where it'll be like, do we know what any of these people wanted? No, we don't even know what they were after, you know. Crazy, fame, just like people to read their stories. I don't know. Did she believe what she was doing? I don't know. I don't know, man. But point being, there's a lot of overlap in this stuff from one crew to the next. Yeah.
I mentioned that Menzel book earlier, and he talks about Palmer and Maury Island and that sort of stuff at the beginning. And I was just thinking, it's like, man, Palmer must have just been over the moon when the Kenneth Arnold made the flying saucers sighting. Like the stories from his magazines were leaping out into reality. It just was crazy. But that's where I left off in that Menzel book.
Yeah,
also,
like it got to where like knock, 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 FBI. Oh, this is great. Come on in. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Keel who called Ray Palmer the man who invented flying saucers?
It may have been.
Yeah, I
And then
think
also,
that's
I
the
just
name
wanted
of that Keel essay. No,
I just wanted to say, going back to Keyhoe, and him writing that short story for Weird Tales and all, just kind of gave me a Whitley Strieber vibe of somebody who kind of went from writing fiction.
And we'll stop there for this edition of the Wayward Sons book group. Think you might be a good fit for the book group? Email me at jackbrewerblog@yahoo.com and I will reply with a free PDF of the book and include you on the list to receive Zoom invitations to the weekly meetings. We record on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and we're always looking for more thoughtful input and intelligent discussion. Visit us at expandingfrontiersresearch.org to learn more about Expanding Frontiers Research. I also encourage you to visit our Patreon account where you can find more interesting material and resources. You'll find the email address as well as the links I mentioned in the video description on YouTube. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Wayward Sons Book Group.